All right. The topic today is inverse functions. Now, we've already talked about functions, and we kind of went through the idea of thinking about a function as a sort of mathematical machine. So here's an example of a function. And we remember doing things like this. Find f of 2, which asks us to plug the 2 in to the function and get the output. So the 2 became a 7. And we could continue this process and come up with an entire table of values. So if I plug in 5, I'm going to get out a 16, a negative 3, I'm going to get out a negative 8, for instance. And why we called this a function was that it had the property that if I picked an x value and plugged it in, I would only ever get out one y value. One x in, one y out. So I knew that this function was always going to turn the 2 into the 7 and the 5 into the 16 and so on. Well, with functions, we sometimes want to ask the opposite question. Is it possible for me to find a machine that undoes what this function does? And that will reverse the process. So, in other words, it'll take the 7, and we plug in the 7, and it returns a 2. Or a 16 gets plugged in and gives us a 5. And so we're looking for another function. Now, we have a name for this function, and we're going to call, and the name for this particular function, this is the notation we use. We use the same function name as the function we're talking about, but this notation is the inverse of f. Now, we use the word inverse, but a lot of times I like to think of it as the reverse is kind of what is happening here. So in this case, the inverse function, and the way we say it is f inverse of x, is equal to x minus 1 over 3. And if you notice, if you make an xy table and plug in the 7 and the 16 and the negative 8, you're going to get out a 2, a 5, and a negative 3. So this is f inverse reverses the process that f does. They go together. There's only one function. There's only one inverse of f, and this is it right here. If you look at the xy tables, you can see that they're swapped. The x column and the y columns swap. So what we're interested in doing is taking the functions that we're used to working with and asking two questions. Number one, does does a given function have an inverse? Is there a function out there that reverses what it does? And number two, what is it? All right. So here, I just went ahead and gave you the inverse. I didn't answer either of those questions. Well, I answered the second question just by giving it to you. But I didn't tell you how to get the inverse. So we're going to look at determining when a function has an inverse first, and then we'll look at how do you find that inverse after that.